a more of an active pattern may evolve next week with more of a ring of fire type of upper air pattern. A lot of guidance that is starting to show and have greater confidence on this happening with more of a northwest flow on the edge of a ridge next week that may bring periods of thunderstorms or almost daily thunderstorms with probably increased chances in severe weather, including complexes of thunderstorms as well. Taking a look at the upper air pattern for next week, the yellow area is showing a little bit more of a ridging pattern with blue showing some troughing. I'll show this map in many videos, and we can take a look at this more of a weak but expansive ridge over the southern portions of the country with some of this more of a northwest type of flow over the Midwest and into the northeast portions of the country. This is a classic track to get a lot of thunderstorms on the edge of this ridge that will push through as we move into next week. But as we move further, just after next week as well, this ridge will keep a similar placement with that northwest flow continuing through the middle of August. This will likely bring periods of hotter and a lot more humid conditions than what we have now, but a more of an extended period of thunderstorms along the edge of this ridge will be possible. So not just next week, but also the week after next week, we may have a very similar pattern with more of a ring of fire pattern. Expected through the middle of the month, it is a very common pattern in July and August. We have a lot of ridging typically at the time of the year, but exactly where that sets up is exactly where you will have that very dry pattern or you will have that hot and active pattern. And it looks like so far we will be in a good spot for the active and hot pattern rather than a very dry and hot pattern. The GFS has a different look for next week, showing more of a compact ridge over the southern plains areas and portions of the mountain west, with more of a distinct northwest flow over the Midwest and into the East Coast. This will bring cooler conditions actually for some of the Great Lakes region and into the Northeast, with very warm, hot conditions up into the plains as well. This would bring a pretty active pattern too, with more of that compact ridging involving, though we may struggle to get all that severe weather to happen, which is definitely a lot different look than the European model for next week. And as we push further into the week after next week, it seems that ridging from this model expands a lot over the Midwest, the upper Midwest, and this would bring very hot and dry conditions after next week again. So again, some differences among the operational model guidance, but then I will show the ensemble guidance now on the same look, on the same map, and then we'll take a look at some of the flow aloft and maybe the conditions that will be favorable for this ring of fire pattern for next week. Taking a look at the European ensemble model guidance for next week as well. It's a very similar look as what the two models we showed before, with some of the expansive but weak ridging through the southern portions of the country, with a northwest flow over the Midwest into the East Coast, with some troughing showing up the further east you go, with maybe the chance for some slight western troughing trying to show up, at least to the Pacific Ocean. This would bring more of a omega block pattern in the middle of August. I don't see that happening as of now, but if that troughing shows up for the west, that would bring more of a omega block pattern, which would erase the ring of fire pattern completely for next week and just be very dry and hot. This is a look now at a different model on the GFS, the ensemble model for next week. Has the ridging slightly further west, the troughing a little bit further west, with that northwest flow over the Midwest into the East Coast. Still though, this look would be slightly more favorable to get them long-lived complexes through the Corn Belt region rather than the other model, but both will still bring more of a ring of fire pattern for a lot of thunderstorm chances and severe weather chances. But this definitely has the center of the ridge further west into the Colorado area, Four Corners area, and then the troughing as you get into the northeast portion of the country or the southeast Canada. So again, a pretty similar look from a lot of model guidance on next week's upper air pattern. Taking a look at the upper air winds as we move into next week, we will have a pretty strong jet streak overhead in the Great Lakes region and into the upper Midwest and into eastern portions of the country. This is decent mid-level flow showing up on The Ensemble guidance as we move into next week, this would bring periods of severe weather easily for, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Dakotas areas. This will be most favorable to happen as we move to next weekend. We continue to see a similar placement of the belt of stronger mid-level flow over the Midwest and into the East Coast in the eastern portions of the country. So again, pretty favorable pattern overall next week for that classic ring of fire pattern over the Corn Belt region. The GFS Ensemble has a pretty similar look as well for next week. That stronger mid-level flow over the Midwest into the Great Lakes region and into the eastern portions of the country. Maybe slightly further south of a jet streak of a belt of the mid-level flow for next week. But either way, both guidance, both ensembles on a very similar look for that ring of fire pattern over the Corn Belt region next week, with plenty of complexes of thunderstorms likely riding the edge of this jet streak. That's typically what happens for next week, which will be, again, over the Corn Belt region. We're in a pattern that has quite a bit of cold front, so low level moisture return will need to be high next week to get all this severe weather to happen, especially in August. You need pretty high dew points in place to get the complex thunderstorms to happen. So as we move into next week, we see that a pretty good amount of low level moisture return ahead of these cold fronts that's moving next week. The dew points well into the 70s on this model, but again, you have multiple cold fronts sweeping through next week, so you're going to need a decent low level moisture return behind these cold fronts pretty rapidly to get these almost daily chances of thunderstorms to happen. Now, model guidance usually sucks at this range on showing the amount of low level moisture return. So I would assume that dew points would be even higher than this, especially that we are in peak cold and sweat season. I would think dew points might be close to 80 degrees at times next week, and we might have faster return of that moisture in place. But still, this model still is indicating pretty fast return of the low level moisture next week behind 2 or 3 cold fronts. So in each of the cold fronts will likely produce the weather, being that we will be in that favorable mid-level pattern as well. You can see because of these higher dew points moving in next week, we should have quite a bit of storm fuel in place. Yeah, you see very sharp gradients in the storm fuel in place along the edge of this ridge early to middle of next week. Between you only get 3,000 to 4,000 joules of storm fuel down to the thousands, 1,000 or less even. So these sharp gradients in the storm fuel and moisture along the edge of the ridge, it's a very classic pattern to get these complexes of thunderstorms to happen along likely a warm front boundary or alpha boundary, any boundary that we would know more as we get closer. I mean, we are still several days away, 6 to 8 days away until we can start seeing these complexes to actually happen. But again, a pretty favorable look ahead, it seems. And this model continues to indicate these complexes of thunderstorms to happen as soon as this weekend, it seems as so. And then as we move to next week with these cold fronts, we see these complexes happening over very similar areas over the Corn Belt region as we move to next week. Middle next week, the end of next week, again, a very similar area of complex of thunderstorms riding over the same exact area. And when you have that, you will get a pretty good amount of moisture to take place next week. You see above average precipitation for the Corn Belt region next week because of them complexes of thunderstorms, or at least almost daily chances of thunderstorms on this model. The GFS model, it's a bit drier for next week, it looks like, which again, the GFS kind of sucks to begin with. But it still tries to bring out some complexes of thunderstorms next week. As we move to the middle of next week, it still has these thunderstorms still happening, at least as we get through next week. So a pretty dry week ahead this week, pretty cool. It does get warmer towards the end of this week. And next week we should start seeing an uptick in severe weather chances, thunderstorm chances, likely increase in moisture next week as well. And we may be pushing the dangerous levels of heat again next week for some areas, especially further west you go. We may be able to get heat index back into the 100 plus range next week, especially at the middle to end of next week. But it all depends on the cold front and how this cold front evolve through the next 14 days or so. But the plains will likely be the hottest next week. For the east, that's where we have them sharp gradients, the most active pattern that will likely set up. So the pattern will get less boring in about 5 to 7 days or so is what this video was pretty much about.